Hey, what's up, Optimal Nation, and welcome to another episode of the Optimal Health Show. In this week's podcast, I got my good friend Richard Nikoley to drop by and talk about resistant starch. Now, there's been a crazy wave going on lately in the whole paleo sphere, talking about, this whole resistant starch. A, what is it? B, where do you get it? And C, what is it actually doing in your body? And people are reporting back crazy things. For example, some people who are type 2 diabetic, they've tried the low carb thing, didn't really work. Then all of a sudden introduced resistant starch, and all of a sudden, boom, their numbers get better and their health improves. Two, people reporting back better cognitive skills, better mood, etc., etc. And something quite fascinating with myself is I've been researching the beneficial effects of resistant starch and sleeping. Now, Richard is a self-geek biohacker. He has been playing around with resistant starch for the last, year or two, and it's amazing stuff that he's coming out with. That's why I have him on the show today. So before we actually get into today's episode, there's a couple of things. One, if you haven't already, please head over to iTunes, leave a review. The more reviews we have, the greater impact and good we can make on a global scale. Number two, I just want to give a huge shout out to everybody out there. Honestly, guys, if it wasn't for you guys participating in our conversations every day, giving me advice on who to bring on the show and who to interview, this wouldn't be possible. So from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank each and every one of you. So without further ado, please sit back and relax and enjoy today's amazing podcast with Richard Nikoley.
When Tim and I started looking into this, we discovered there's like hundreds of research papers going back like 30 years. Some reason it has been off of the radar of most health people. I just don't think they fully understood it. And of course there's tons of confusion. Because in low carb circles and everything, there's this idea that starch is starch and it all is glucose.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Now, I wouldn't mind you telling our audience a little bit about yourself, like a background. Where do you come from, and what got you interested in actually studying resistant starch?
Well, where I came from, how as far back you want to go. I was an entrepreneur for 20 years. Since the early 90s, and had a company and all of that stuff and all the pressures that go along with that, and plus getting older and getting married and all those things. So everything was pretty fine up until the late 30s, early 40s, and the weight just started to tack on. And so I think it was 2007. So I would have been, I was like 36-ish or something at the time, and or 46-ish, I should say, and I just got fed up with being so overweight, having high blood pressure, all that stuff. So that's how I discovered paleo and intermittent fasting, and it was a low carb version of it at the time. And it worked, fasting and, going to the gym and working out in a power curve style where it's more intense for less time trade-off. And it worked, and I lost 60 pounds, and I blogged as a hobby. And so, I just started blogging about it, and eventually kind of just migrated my blog into pretty much mostly about nutrition and health. Since then, in the last couple of years, I've gone back to blogging some more, social commentary type of stuff, just to keep it interesting and to keep me engaged and not bored. Because how many different ways can you blog about the same topics over and over and over again? And I guess that's one of my, I would say that was one of my strengths in terms of blogging. Is I'm always looking for something new. And I'd almost given up. At some point, I was into talking about like the cold thermogenesis kind of thing. and decided, well, it's not really a lifestyle. It's something that, it's good to get cold every once in a while. It's good to take a dip in the lake, or a cold lake, or lay in a cold stream, or take cold showers. And I have a big tank out in my backyard, and I fill it with the garden hose, and I'll just dip in there. It's a great way to cool down in the summer, and it's a great way to get a good shiver on in the wintertime, when the water's 20 degrees colder. But it's not really anything that is something that you would just really apply to your daily life unless you're kind of bizarre. And I've done a few other experiments. There was doing an all milk and kefir deal for some weeks. That was very interesting.
I bet.
Well, it's kind of styled after the Go Mad thing. So the idea is you pack on a lot of pounds, but you pack on both fat and muscle, and then you cut. And then I use the potato diet, which is very effective at losing fat pretty rapidly. And then that's how we got onto the resistant starch thing, because Tim was the one promoting, my collaborator, Tim Steele, aka Tater Tot, was the guy who started posting about this potato hack thing. And I tried that for a while, but it was like, I really like potatoes, and I don't want to end up hating them. And so that it wasn't kind of a deal for me. But so that gradually, we thought that the whole secret behind the potato hack was resistant starch, but it probably wasn't, because there's just not enough in them, and not even if they're cooked and cooled, which when you cool it, it forms retrograde resistant starch that is actually resistant to reheating. But it's still a relatively small amount. And the way that we can get resistant starch into our diet is very much unlike Paleo Man did, which we can get into.
Why don't you define exactly what is resistant starch?
All right. So first of all, and this kind of goes back to one of my frustrations, particularly with the carb community during this whole process, is this idea that starch is starch, and all starch ends up as glucose. Well, I doubt that many people realize that there are about roughly 50, as I count, roughly 50 different structures of starch, the way the molecules and all that stuff are ordered.
The chains you're talking about.
Chains, yeah, the pectin, and all that stuff, all that gobbledygook stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there is, of those 50-ish structures, about 3 of them are in a structure that escapes breakdown by your enzymes, gastric juices and stuff in your stomach and your small intestine. They just pass right on through. But the bugs in your colon, in your long intestine, those things where there's 10 of them for every cell in your body. So I like to tell people, you're only 10% of who you think you are.
That's right.
And so it goes down there, and those things love them, and the good ones seem to do better with it, and there's the primary ones who feed off of it, then there's the co-feeders who feed on what they produce, and they produce a lot of short chain fatty acids and everything, and that was another point of confusion early on, with especially with low carbers. I say, well, if I want butyric acid, I just eat butter. Nope, sorry, it never gets there to your colon. It's being produced by those bacteria in your colon. If you just eat butter, all of that's used in your digestion.
That's interesting, though, that you said that the resistant starch actually produces short chain fatty acids and creates butyric acid, and that kind of, like, I would postulate that would keep you in almost like a low carb state. No.
Well, no, because not really. Although what it can do, what we found by testing is that it has zero effect on your low carb status. You can have your plain old, meat and leafy veggie type of low carb style, piece of fruit here and there, keeping it under 30 or 60 or whatever your deal is, whether you're ketogenic or just plain old low carb. And if you just supplement with potato starch, this is the easiest way to get it, because you go to the store. It's in most supermarkets, Bob's Red Mill, unmodified potato starch. And I have to make a big capital letter here. It's not potato flour. The former is they just basically take raw potatoes, peel them, and they grate them and make the slurry in the water. And basically, by sieving it and stuff, it knocks out all these little starch granules. So, and it even solanine and all that stuff is water soluble. So you don't get it. You shouldn't have any of those nightshade issues with it. Some people have reported it, but very few. And I think it's in their heads. But that's
So to recap, you're saying the best way to get resistant starch is to get potato starch.
Potato starch, plain old unmodified potato starch. It's cheap. About 4 tablespoons of it per day will get you roughly 30 grams of resistant starch. It is about 80% resistant starch by weight, and 20% is moisture, which is actually moisture locked inside of the minute little starch granule.
So what would you do with the potato starch? Is there any processing that you have to do, or how would you actually ingest this?
You could do it any way you want. You can add it to. You can. A lot of people just stir it up in water and down it. It's not really bad. You can put it in kefir, milk, juice, whatever you want. You can put it in any cold or warm dish. You have to keep it under about 140. Because when you get to 140, what happens is the little water that's locked in the granule, it's just like a kernel of popcorn. When it hits, it goes poof, and it bursts into fast digesting starch.
What is this thing I keep on hearing about with resistant starch and putting, for example, some people will say they put their potatoes in the fridge overnight, and that act of cooling does something to the actual structure of the starch.
So I told you there's 3 types, and they're classified as RS1, RS2, and RS3. There's a 4th type of resistant starch called RS4, but that is a manufactured product. It's not a naturally occurring resistant starch. I think there's some products out there, Superstarch or High Maize or something like that, where they do some chemical processes to create it, but it doesn't form naturally. The ones that form naturally, RS1 is principally found in seed grains, your wheats and your barleys and your rye and stuff like that. So ironically enough, people who eat a sad diet are probably getting more resistant starch than people on paleo or people on low carb, because of the grain products. The RS2 is the one typically found in fruits and starchy vegetables. The principal fruit you find RS2 in is green plantains and green bananas. Now, it's hard to eat a green plantain, but I actually prefer green bananas to yellow ripe ones.
You know what they actually used to do in Jamaica if you had any constipation issues? It would actually give you green plantains.
Yeah. And what you can do with green plantains is you cut it lengthwise, and you can kind of peel off the skin. It's pretty hard to peel off. But then you can just slice them, and if you have a dehydrator, you can dehydrate them. I've done it with like jerky, a salt, pepper, garlic mix. I did one with some cinnamon and sugar. Or you can just do them with salt, and the texture after they're dried is kind of like saltine crackers. And they're actually a pretty good substrate for something like hummus or something like that. Chickpea, legumes have a good amount of resistant starch too, and it's RS2. So the RS2 is found in starchy veggies. Unfortunately, sweet potatoes have hardly any, but the regular potatoes do, and there's a lot in cassava, taro, everything. But legumes, now here's an interesting thing. So people may have heard, um, um, years back called it used to be called the lentil effect, and then it became the second meal effect. It turns out that you don't get the blood sugar spike from eating beans that you would expect to, given the number of carbohydrates, right? And not only that, but if you eat beans, and when I say beans, I say, if eat them, prepare them traditionally properly. The old 24 to 48 hour soak. You can even ferment, you can sprout them, stuff like that. I typically just do the 24-hour soak myself. Black beans are the best, and pinto beans are pretty good. But anyway, what it turns out is that if you actually eat beans regularly, it not only blunts blood sugar spikes from the beans is what you would expect per gram of carbohydrate when you compare it to other things that you eat. But it also blunts spikes from other regular starches that you eat, and it persists into the next day. So it's called the second meal effect. And this is resistant starch that's doing this, it turns out.
Yeah, that's fascinating because I was actually looking at one of your updates lately, and you're taking your blood glucose testing after some meals of resistant starch, and you were noting that you really didn't have any significant spikes within your blood glucose levels.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of people, and even tons of diabetics. This is a big deal for diabetics because they are getting, number one, it's significant over time. I'm talking, after several weeks of supplementing the potato starch. Yeah, some people do 2 tablespoons, some people do 4, some people do a little bit more than that. But I think it's more the consistency over time and mixing it up as to whether you just take it on an empty stomach with water or take it before a meal or after a meal. I try to do all these things because nobody really knows what is the most effective way to do it. And I also do green plantain flour as well. I dried some plantains. It's kind of a pain in the butt. You can get Berry Farms green plantain flour from Amazon, and I just I'll take a tablespoon of that a day or two, as well. And that will give you a little bit of a spike because it's the whole plantain, but it is made from green plantains. So there's not a lot. It doesn't give you a big spike or anything like that. You may get a rise of 10 to 20 points in your blood sugar, but yeah, the diabetics are finding that their fasting blood or their overnight or fasting blood glucose, I would say that the average is on the order of like 20 points. So someone who's constantly having a fast of like 110-ish, which is very common for low carb people because of physiological insulin resistance, because they're having to make glucose and the body seems to overshoot, or it's just not that concerned, so it conserves. Actual physiology is there, but they're finding they're finding themselves get down to 90s, 80s, even into the 70s. And and one guy just reported the other day, he took potato starch, ate a big baked potato, and his sugars only went, I think he went up to like 130-ish, and where normally he would go up to 180 or 200 for after a potato. So these are some of the when I set out to do this, I said, I'm going to come up with mashed potatoes even a diabetic can eat, right? How you can do that. It's amazing. You can test it yourself. Make mashed potatoes as you normally would, right? Eat them, do your blood glucose. Then make them a second time, and when they're like at 130 degrees, you got to let them cool a bit. When they're like 130 degrees, stir in like 2 tablespoons of potato starch. It's potatoes in potato. Stir it in there. You won't even taste the difference at all. And then do that same test over again, and you'll be amazed. You'll be amazed. And so instead of going like to 140, 50, 60 or whatever, that's what happens to me. it'll be more like 120.
Yeah, I'm curious if resistant starch has any like upregulations with the thyroid metabolism, because you're reporting a lot of people's metabolisms and weight is benefiting from eating resistant starch. So I'm curious to see, is there any connections with like T3 or T4 and the HPA axis? Have you seen any studies or have you heard of anything of this connection?
Yeah, I have not seen that in terms of thyroid regulation. There's a lot of speculation on it, and the person to talk to about that is Dr. Animal Farm, Dr. BG. I don't know if you know who she is, but I can certainly get you in touch with her via email. And my collaborator, Tim, is really the study guy, but I can't remember. I'm more the promoter and the big picture kind of guy, so that everybody can understand it and be interested in it. But what I have seen is this. I don't know if you know who. There's a guy out there, Matt Stone.
Yeah, he talks about like the body temperature gauging.
And his solution to that seems to me to be eat a bunch of crap and eat a bunch of crappy carbohydrates and even like refined sugar and so on and so forth, and you'll get your body temperature up there, because body temperature is all important. And that never really made sense to me, but after people started doing this, I had I got like there's almost 50 posts on resistant starch at freetheanimal.com, and you just hit the tag resistant starch, boom, be all in a row. There are thousands and thousands comments and hundreds of anecdotes of people who've actually been trying it all over the world. And I often, when I post, I use my Amazon affiliate thing for potato starch, because you can get it from Amazon. And I think that's been I've seen that in my lists there's at least been over 300 purchases of that, and that doesn't even include the people who just got it at their local supermarket, and there's people all over the world. But what I see is there was someone first reported, she said temperature is going up because she was reporting it, and then other people started reporting the same thing. And it's like, I have been fighting this body temperature for 20 years, and just in doing this, and boom, it's up normal. I myself have been clinically hypothyroid for a long time. Have been on Armour, and at first it was the synthetic. I don't take it much anymore, and I haven't really had tests anymore. But I don't have the loss of eyebrows or any of those other kinds of weird symptoms, and I'm not lethargic and tired and stuff like that. But the one thing I've had is the cold hands and cold feet. And incidentally, my hypothyroid clinically is because of elevated TSH. The T3 and T4 check out in normal ranges. So I don't even know what all that means, but what I do know is that my hands and feet are toasty now. Because it's never an issue in the summer months, but as soon as fall hits and it starts getting cold, I've got perpetual cold hands and feet, and right now they're both sweating, and I'm not even nervous when I do podcasts.
So, what would you say is a good strategy for somebody who wishes to implement resistant starch to maybe experiment to see how they react to it?
Post, and what you should do is email me and say, give me 2 or 3 post links, so you can put them in show notes or something. If I assume you put this up on a blog.
Yeah, it'll be up in a couple of weeks. Yeah.
And then I can point to it and everything, and put some links in there. But I do, yeah, I have a few posts. In fact, just a couple weeks ago, I wrote a post, a primer for resistant starch, basically from a whole dietary standpoint. In terms of supplementing, now the one side effect, I should say, that has been pretty universally reported. Only a few say no, it doesn't happen. Is it can induce significant flatulence. I mean, comic proportions. But here's what's weird: is it's not particularly odorous. So it's not the same kind of sulfur type of thing happening in the small intestine or whatever. It's something different, but it seems to average out. Now, what I've found from my own experimentation is that if you take it with water, like on an empty stomach, you get little to none. It's when you take it in conjunction with food, either shortly before or shortly after, that seems to be the biggest bang. And if you take it with beans, you're in for a wild ride. Some people actually have fun with it. It does tend to settle out. Some people can't tolerate it. Some people are in social or work situations where it makes it problematic, and I understand that. The point I would like to make is that anti-flatulence is kind of a social construct. The fact is because this is not the super odorous sort, typically. I mean, even like onions, a lot of people will have often significant, I call it fartage, with onions, and those can be pretty ripe. But this is a weird thing. It doesn't tend to smell, but it can be like amazing amounts of gas in a short time, and that is all those gut bugs just going to town. You're feeding them, and it tends to you're feeding the good ones. Yes, there are some pathogenic ones that eat resistant starch too, but the idea is that if you feed the good ones enough and consistently enough, they create an environment in there that is not conducive to the pathogens. They keep them at bay.
I'm curious, doing like an experimentation with, say, running a PCR genetic stool analysis from one of the labs before actually implementing any resistant starch and seeing your actual genetics of the bacteria. Then maybe, say, I don't know, like 2 months later, running the same test and comparing the difference. That would be really interesting to see what kind of ecology changes down there.
Oh, well, we've got something. I don't know if you saw this. There is an Indiegogo project. A guy who was into this, reader of my blog. Well, see, let me back up. Tim, unfortunately, it wasn't available before he started. And you've heard of the American Gut Project.
Oh, yes.
So he sent off for that, and he got his results. They're on my blog with the charts. It turns out he has like the most this was after several months of supplementing resistant starch, eating lots of green plantains, cooked and cooled potatoes. We didn't talk too much about the retrograde, but when you cook potatoes, beans, and rice, principally, and you cool them, they form RS3, which is retrograde resistant starch. It's a different structure, but it's unique also in that it is resistant to reheating. And in fact, each heating cooling cycle produces a little bit more retrograde resistant starch, although it's on a curve. So the first time is the biggest bang for the buck. But anyway, so he was doing all this stuff for several months, and he did him and his wife, and his wife just eats the regular SAD diet. So his gut profile was pristine. He had all of this great, back in the really low resolution part where there's all these different mixes. He had like zero of some of the pathogens, and like 11 times less than the average person that American Gut Project. That's when you're a factor of 11, that's probably not an accident. But there was no before and after, right? Oh, and his wife's was awful. But she eats a regular diet, and she's done lots of antibiotics throughout her life and everything, which is, antibiotics is carpet bombing, select for the good ones versus the bad. And if you realize that the good ones are what principally keeps the bad ones in check, then you can see how things like still get going, So anyway, what happened is, and this is also on my blog. So if you want to email me about it, I'll tell you. The project is fully funded. In fact, it's overfunded at this point. But it's a man and his wife and two kids of four families. They have not done the resistant starch yet, so they're sending off and doing their tests before they start, and then I think they're doing 3 months of it in different. So there's four of them, so they're all doing it in a little bit different ways, and then they are going to send in a second sample at the end of that period of time, so that we'll have how does this change your gut profile over time.
Yeah, I'm just really curious to see, is there maybe a connection between like epigenetic variants between people? Say, if your grandparents come from Middle East, which is, the cradle of civilization, or if some come from a very type of almost like seasonal ketogenic type environment, maybe England or Northern European, and how each of those different cultures and people would react to the resistant starch. Because when we look at like diets and we look at what we eat, it's more based on seasonal. Our gut bacteria changes ratios from season to season. It's not static from month to month. It actually it alters. And I'm really curious to see that if I take, for example, resistant starch in harvest time, say around October or something like that in the fall, and maybe I have resistant starch in the winter time just for experimentation when I really didn't have access to carbs, would there be a difference? I find it fascinating. Just there's a lot of room for experimentation there.
Some of the things that resistant starch are highest in are storage type foods. Like the tubers,
Mm-hmm.
and various roots, and here's an interesting thing. Like some of the rinzones or whatever they're called, they eat them. They pull them out of the ground and they eat them they peel they chew on the skin without even washing them. So you're getting soil based bacteria and and they're eating them raw, and you're getting it all in one shot. Now, here's a very interesting thing, and you can do the resistant starch. If you take it, for example, with kefir or mix it in your sauerkraut, kefir being dairy-based probiotics, sauerkraut or kimchi, and all these other things being more soil-based bacteria. Those bacteria will attach themselves to the little teeny starch granule, and they get a protected bus ride down to the colon. Whereas when you just take probiotics, in fact, they've done tests on this. When you take probiotics just by themselves, unless there's some way to get them past your stomach acid and enzymes and through the small intestine, you're just basically giving yourself expensive poop, right? So there's all these speculations now too, because you can, it was originally theorized. Well, if you have SIBO, small intestine bacterial overgrowth, if you take resistant starch, you may be worsening that. But the reports I'm getting in is people saying, actually, it's helping my heartburn and heartburn or GERD. Probably a chief cause of it is small intestine bacterial overgrowth. These things start feeding and it creates pressure and pushes acid into your esophagus.
It seems though there seems to be room for a good synergistic combination between, say, a low carb approach and using resistant starch as a very a precise tool for a specific reason. So, for example, you just mentioned SIBO. Maybe if you're low carb, you can play around with, say, resistant starch a couple of days of the week to see how your body reacts.
Yeah. Well, I think the best way to do that is, and this is total speculation, right? Here's the thing: out of thousands of people and hundreds of anecdotes, not a person has reported any harm to this at all. And you can take a bolus dose of potato starch with water, test your blood glucose. It ain't going up at all. So it doesn't affect ketosis, but you are feeding your gut bacteria at the same time, and It's very satiating too. This is another thing people report. I mean, the chief things are blood glucose regulation, lower fasting, blunting of spikes, satiation, and the other one we haven't even talked about is very vivid dreaming. So the speculation there is with the bacteria in your gut being fed,
For serotonin production,
yes. And so there's the gut brain whole thing, right? So it's really interesting, thing. But I have a speculation that the potato starch can actually help clear SIBO out because bacteria and they do this. They've done this in petri dishes where the bacteria will be attached to some other substrate, and I forget what it was, but they introduce resistant starch granules, and within 2 minutes they will detach and go attach to the resistant starch. It's like a magnet for bacteria, right? And so I speculate that having that in with water on an empty stomach, like in the morning, take a bolus dose, like 4 tablespoons, let it just pass through, and kind of like mop up and carry. It's probably going to be kind of a long-term process, right? And probably, you've always got bacteria in your small intestines. That's why it's called bacteria overgrowth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Be a tool to help keep that thing to a minimum.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious also with the whole mineral balance, because a lot of people who do go on low carb, they tend to, because, for example, tubers and the grains, they tend to have a lot of potassium inside of them. And when they go on low carb, they're kind of depleted of potassium for the time being until they start implementing more root vegetables. I'm just curious to see if the resistant starch may be benefiting the mineral balance within the body.
I think you're probably going to want to interview Tim and then also maybe Grace, Dr. BG. I'll give you their contact information. But Tim and you can get way more into the exact nitty-gritty science of the thing. But yes, this is another thing that I have that has been banned out in terms of studies and everything. There's tons of studies, dogs, pigs, and all sort, even humans. A lot of times with the humans, they use the IMAs, and it's with the animals that they tend to use the potato starch more. I guess because it's cheap. But yes, it purportedly enhances your vitamin and mineral absorption from other foods, right? And apparently, some vitamins are actually produced by the bacteria in your gut if they're fed. There's another study that when there is sufficient resistant starch, you don't lose. You hold on to your serum vitamin D levels better.
Interesting. I gotta look at that up.
There's so many tons of stuff, but it makes perfect sense because here's a funny thing. You know what? All these bacteria in our guts, they were here before we were. Right?
Yeah. That's right.
Like 2 billion, whatever, right? At least. So at a point, you have to ask the question. Well, did we just evolve as elaborate hosts for these colonies of bacteria?
Hey, we're living ecology. We're a symbiotic system of different bacterias and organisms and parasites that must get along together. We're not humans. Have you ever heard of the Gaia principle?
Gaia?
Yeah.
It rings a bell, but
it's fascinating. The author talks about how the world itself is a cell. Like, for example, trees can be the Golgi apparatus, the oceans can be maybe the cytoskeleton, and he paints the whole world as a cell, but he paints the whole universe as a cell itself, and it's kind of like the fractal theory. So he's trying to paint our bodies the same way, as in the fact that each section of our body is an individual unit, but we actually functions together as one individual being.
Right. A cell or just like an organism, you're just talking about different resolution, right?
Yeah.
You look at the universe. Well, it has properties of itself organism, right? But then you can just keep going down. And it's kind of like the same building block over and over and over. You go down and down and down.
Yeah, exactly. So if you had to summarize and someone really want to get more detailed information about resistant starch, where would they go?
Go to freetheanimal.com because there's just nothing. I mean, there's so much research. I've got links there to some of the best of the best because but Tim and I have both dug into. I've read some and I've scanned some. There's hundreds of them. So I have a post where I picked out about 13 good ones, and then I did another post where I picked out about 5 good ones. And like I said, I'll give you the tag link. So you can scan through and read which posts. Some of them are very detailed, and some of them are just like some of the food that I've done and so on. So it's pretty widely varied. Like I said, I have a post on a kind of a primer for those people who want to get started with it. And you can do it within any diet you want. And basically, I mean, the easiest way is you go get Bob's Red Mill unmodified potato starch, and you start stirring it in water. And I say anywhere from about 2 tablespoons to 4 a day on average. Whether you break them up, one, or take them all at once. I don't know that it matters. I would say mix it up. Don't take the same dose all the time. Give yourself a break every couple of days. And give it a try. But if you have a compromised gut, it didn't happen overnight. This isn't some miracle cure where it's going to happen overnight. And some people really have a problem with the flatulence. I would say, give it. It took me a couple of months. And every once in a while, like randomly, I'll still get it. But that happens in normal life too. Every once in a while, you don't know what happened, but boom, all of a sudden, you got it. So it becomes back to normal that way. But the benefits to me in terms of the wow sleep and vivid dreaming. Everybody reports this, like vivid dreams, it's like reading a novel and then you remember it the next day. Stuff like this, way better TMI. So there's many things, but animal.com, when you find an article, hit the tag link. That'll just give you everything in reverse chronological order, and I will make sure to shoot you some of the more important specific links that you want to highlight, Ameer.
Awesome. Well, Richard, thank you so much for coming on today's show and talking about resistant starch and educating our audience. I'm sure they gained a lot of knowledge from this, and I'm telling everybody, go to freetheanimal.com, check out Richard's stuff. There's going to be a lot in the show notes over here, so make sure you check that out. And once again, Richard, thanks for coming on the show, and have an amazing day, brother.
Ameer, it was very much, and anytime. So, all right, thanks.